Since the day it happened, I'd imagined killing him 1,000 times. Sometimes I'd punch and kick him until he cried and begged for mercy. Other times I'd blow him up or shoot him or do any number of things I've seen in RoboCop or Terminator. Still, I was only a child and nowhere near capable of killing someone, much less doing it with an improvised explosive device made of household cleaners and 9-volt batteries as I'd imagined it. OAD. That was the name given to my nightmares by the friendly men and women of Playco Inc., makers of fine games such as Urchin 300 and Vague Assault. Plus, of course, Skull and Crossbow, a game I'd forever regret playing. I had found it at the mall one day and it seemed as if someone had put in a quarter and left. I took up the free game and it got into my head. When everything was said and done, something, reached out of the game cabinet and took my friend away. The only reason I'd been spared that fate was because he had tried to horn in on what I was doing, took the controls from me. Nicholas. Less than a year later, I was having trouble remembering his name. I would have chalked it up to my imagination or a dream, or anything that would let me believe it hadn't happened. But Nicholas. His parents searched for him. The police searched for him. His disappearance kicked off a huge scandal for the mall and the arcade. Before long, the Dream Machine arcade was closed due to unrelated circumstances, and I lost my only shot at figuring out what really happened. It didn't help that I lied. I didn't lie because nobody would believe in OAD, the many ripped skeleton centipede from Netherworld, though they wouldn't. No. I lied because I couldn't bring myself to admit I'd had any part whatsoever in the disappearance, the death, of Nicholas. His parents cornered me one day when I was leaving school and making my way onto the bus. They backed me to one of the red brick walls and, frantic, demanded to know what had happened to their son because I must know something I'm not saying. I must have looked absolutely horrified, which I was, because one of the bus drivers actually left her vehicle and ran over to see what was going on. It took that driver and 2 other teachers to escort the couple away. Every step, they kept shouting at me, screaming that they knew I saw who'd taken their boy. They were right. However, what disturbed me more than anything else was how I felt about it all. I dreaded being discovered. I was frightened that OAD would find me somehow, maybe slip out from under my bed. And I was enraged by my now hazy memories to the point of repeated mental butchering of that skeletal freak. Yet, I was never sad about it. I never shed a tear for Nicholas. I hadn't cried once. When my hamster got lost and we never found it, when Grandma passed away, when my parents fought and threatened to split up, I didn't feel sad about anything anymore. After a while, OAD was replaced by other faces within my imaginary torture chamber. Anyone who annoyed or threatened me in any way. Sometimes it was even Nicholas himself who had caused the entire problem in the first place. By now, I'm wondering if you've considered the fact that I openly mentioned Playco, makers of the accursed, maybe just cursed, game that had so afflicted my young life. Thank you for purchasing for the Playco 280 game mega console. Plug in this state-of-the-art gaming device directly into your television. For you it is to enjoy countless hours of fun. 280 games, 280 new adventure. Game included on this a console. 21 horse fun run rally. Age of battle. Art control. Beach calm. Fear command. Glee glee. Gorilla. Urchin 300, Vague Assault, Xenopho 84, and plenty more. I read the back of the box while my mom was elsewhere in the drugstore. Both of my parents had kept a close eye on me ever since Nicholas was kidnapped, but every once in a while I could slip away from my guards. When she did catch up with me, I was studying the box art. It showed tons of different characters, animals, and creatures all surrounding this odd green hexagonal gaming console with a glowing white fish icon on its surface. "Oh no," she remarked the instant she saw it. "I know," I replied. "I'm just looking." To be honest, I wasn't really that into video games in light of what had occurred. I hadn't played any, hadn't thought about them, and didn't really care to. Still, something about this object in my hands just felt safe. It was like I had been burned in the past, but was ready to start exploring new relationships again. Still, I knew I couldn't get it, so I put it back on the shelf and stepped away, still fixated on its glossy cover. "You're such a good kid." I didn't know how to reply to that. Mom walked over to the shelf and looked at the box. As an adult, her eye immediately moved to the red price sticker. I'd paid absolutely no attention. "Well," she thought for a moment, then without another word she picked up the box and carefully placed it in the shopping cart. "Really?" I nearly gasped. "Yeah, we can call it an early birthday present." I knew full well by this point that early birthday presents didn't really detract from the shower of toys that would rain down upon me on the actual date. When I got home, she'd regret the purchase. I couldn't be calmed by anything short of setting up the console as quickly as possible. The directions seemed confusing, written in broken English and referencing specific cables and cords by technical names instead of the large plug or the screwy shape thing. She almost had it set up and I was dancing in place when there was a sudden loud pop and flashed light. She screamed. "Are you okay?" I rushed over to her, once again on edge. Yes, she stammered, blinking repeatedly. "I got a shock, I'm okay, don't worry about it." I did worry, but at no time did I feel sad about it. Within minutes, the console had been started, and the television screen faded from black to a dark green. A chiming sound played and the screen read, "Playcoat Inc. Dream Real." I selected Glee completely at random and got playing. It was a side-scrolling shooter where I guided some sort of spacecraft through the barrage of other oddly shaped tiny fighters. When the level had started, the game name was written in bland block lettering, with the instructions just beneath. "Guide you ship to home. Along the way, press Z button to fire. Press X button to shield." I should mention that the controller, just one, as it seemed there was no capability for a two-player mode, was just a directional pad, a shared start reset button, and two little dots marked X and Z. The controls were clunky at best and, at worst, completely unresponsive. The sound didn't make very good use of the television speakers. Dull, slow buzzes and distorted chirps signaled everything from player damage to the destruction of enemy fighters. I racked up many deaths and plenty of restarts on Glee, but for some reason I felt compelled to keep trying. On what must have been my 6th to 8th restart, the controls were feeling a lot more responsive and easy to use. Either I had worn in the factory new controller or the game itself was reducing the difficulty for me, as it backed and forth, blowing up enemies and putting up my shield to avoid fire. I shot in rapid succession and picked up a series of power-ups that did nothing more than cause my bullets, a plain pixel, to move in different ways. I was destroying the opposing team, blasting away when I took note of something strange. At some point, the enemy fighters, the tiny spaceships, had been swapped out for what appeared to be large fetus-like creatures. I stopped firing when I realized that instead of attacking me, instead of firing and dodging, they were just trying to get away from me. At some point, I had stopped defending myself and smoothly transitioned into peppering defensive pre-birth beings with deadly fire. I let the game run for a few minutes as I watched this spectacle. A space fetus would drop onto the screen, then slowly float away from my ship. Though they were formed of the most basic pixel imagery, I could swear they looked scared. The change was confusing and disquieting, so I stopped the game and decided to select another. Urchin 300. Follow an underwater pass. Avoid an urchin. Use your X button to place the bombs. Use your Z button to skip a turn. The screen became a grid of 10 by 10 tiles. At the center was a little person, and all around him, placed randomly, were 4 round spiny urchins. The urchins were easily twice the size of the player sprite, and had a single large whirling eyeball on top of their heads. I moved the little man onto another tile, after which all the urchins moved one tile closer to him. I quickly got the idea. Every time I moved, the urchins would try to get a little closer to me. It was reasonable to assume that if any of them touched me, I'd be dead. Rather, the little guy would be dead. I pressed the Z button to place a bomb, figuring I could somehow trick the urchins into it. Unfortunately, I had mixed them up in my head, and the Z button was to skip a turn. The urchins drew closer and I hadn't even moved. Using the correct button, I dropped a bomb, a cartoon spherical bomb with a fuse, and moved on to the next tile. Above me and to the right, two urchins moved onto the same tile, creating a single urchin with two eyes. The eyes didn't rotate anymore, and instead fixed straight forward, out of the screen and onto me. By moving cleverly and placing bombs in much the same manner, I eventually guided all the urchins, even the unpleasant two-eyed urchin, to their destruction. Each time one touched a bomb, it would burst into the most pleasing multicolored explosion. It was a dazzling flash that immediately drew my attention and made me want to see it again and again, over and over. I was about 3 levels in, when I was surrounded by mounting numbers of urchins that I finally slipped up. Seeing no way out of a corner I painted myself into, I quickly tapped the Z button and skipped enough turns for the urchins to close in and end the round. As soon as the first urchin touched the player's sprite, a sudden ear-splitting shriek emanated from the speakers. I physically jumped at the unexpected scream and quickly turned down the volume. I watched in impotent anger as the urchin knocked me down, undulated over me, and began spinning its eyeball even more wildly than before. It bobbed up and down, all the while making the sound of teeth grinding bone. When it was finished, the urchin moved off the tile, leaving nothing behind but a trail of dark red blood that mirrored the playing field as it slowly made its way across the screen. At this point, I was ready to select another game, and I'd already realized that this system might never get played with again after today. My thumb was over the start reset button, a split second away from plunging down upon it when the screen stopped me cold. Nicholas 2 of 3. The grid reappeared, still smeared with blood. The urchins had been randomly placed again, and there was my sprite at the center of his screen. "What?" I whispered, completely focusing on the little man. I put the controller down and crawled on hands and knees to the screen. Nicholas? I didn't even know what I was looking for, or what the game had meant. For all I knew, the main character just happened to have the name, like Mario or Samus. The sprite moved. It was a slight, almost unnoticeable movement, just a tilt of the head as the little man looked at the closest urchin and then looked away. If I hadn't been 2 inches from the screen, I doubt I would have seen it. I grabbed the controller and immediately hit start reset to end this horrible game. After that, I turned it off and break it? As soon as I ended the game, the urchins all made a unanimous sweeping movement towards the player. Towards Nicholas? Before they reached him, as the second ear-splitting shriek ripped through me, regardless of the volume setting, the screen faded to dark red. The letters appeared in white, in the same bland game text. Quitter. Poor Nicholas. I ran from the room all the way to the backyard where my mother was working on her herb garden. "Mom!" "What? Is something wrong?" "Mom, Mom!" I ran into her arms, nearly knocking her over. "It's Nicholas!" Her face immediately turned from concern to shock. "What, dear, what? Did you remember something?" I just held on tight and didn't say a word. My mind raced. Could I say what had really happened? Could I show her the game, make it say Nicholas, and convince her? What about all the blame I'd get for lying all this time? As I searched my thoughts in a matter of seconds, I realized something was missing. Guilt. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I didn't care about lying or continuing to lie. I didn't feel guilty for what had happened to Nicholas, and I didn't necessarily care if he ever came back. In the absence of this emotion, I couldn't put my finger on why I'd even run to my mom in the first place. It was like I'd suddenly been relieved of a heavy burden and no longer had any fear of repercussion. "Never mind," I finally replied. "Everything is okay." Calmly and in a way I'm sure must have confused my mother, I strolled back into the house, to the console, and sat down in front of it. I looked through the menu again and decided to play something new. I went directly to the bottom of the list, to the very last game, and to this day I don't even know what made me sure I wanted to play it. Xenopho 84. Nothing makes sense in the minus world. A familiar skull face flashed on the screen only briefly, and within moments all I could feel was a blinding sense of rage. "Hi, Nicholas." I grinned cruelly at the little man on the screen. "Now we can play again, and again, and again."
the flow.
Plus, getting the dough.
We be checking your hoe
While you sweating the flow.
I be intellectual, incredible, flexible. I turn the virgin sexual, impeccable, but technical.
I be the first letter. You ain't know. Check the alphabetical order. My natural elements, chemical shorter to leave it cruel. More bloodier than menstrual waters. On the 28th, your thoughts are pennyweight. I'ma generate these bonds. Watch as I detonate.
At any rate, I separate like races. Niggas segregate you featherweights.